And we should be live. Very good. So if you guys have your live session on and we are live, go ahead and mute that. And for everybody else, hi everybody, I'm Belinda Allen, and this is our Power Platform Share. We're still working out a few kinks at the beginning, so sorry about that. But I have with us today the most wonderful, regular part of this program and important parts. My very dear friends. We'll start with the fabulous from Atlanta, Mr. Mariano Gomez, wearing his Power Addict shirt today. Hi, Mariano.
How you guys doing? I hope we can entertain you for this for the next hour. So we have some really cool stuff to show you, and we thank you for being here.
Cool. And Vivek, if you're watching, I didn't get one of those shirts at the MVP Summit. And also is the very brilliant from Southern California when it's not on fire, Mr. Steve Endow.
Greetings. Good to be here.
Cool. So thank you guys for coming, and I'm going to pop up for just a moment again. I want to point out that I haven't shared anything in a while, so I'm going to start out the share today. If you haven't joined us before, this is our way of showing you what we think is cool and what we've been working on lately. And so that's what this is all about. And I'm going to go ahead and just drop my face once again. And I'm going to pull up, and you know what, for the guys, let me share my screen so they could see what's going on. So I'm going to share my entire screen just so they know what I'm showing. Da, da, da. Okay, so I'm going to start out by giving creds where creds are due. Ted Pattison, a good friend of mine, and fellow MVP for Power BI, and he's also a Power Apps MVP. This is from some of his training material, so I want to give him credit here. It's critical path training. He's pretty darn awesome, and he trains on the whole Power Platform family, and he's in Tampa, and that's the Tampa user group thing. So this is not a new functionality, but it's something that I've been mulling around in my head for a while. So I kind of want to share it with you guys, Mariano and Steve, because you may not know it even exists. So I'm going to start by showing you what Ted does, and then I'll show you a live example. So you could create a visual in Power BI. There's a custom connector out there that uses HTML5, and it works a little bit differently, but here's an example that Ted created with action figures. And if you like, I'm going to select action figures, and you notice that my regular slicer will update accordingly. So let's just go to tough guys. So you could look at it. He doesn't have our 3 characters on there. I might have to talk to him about that. But you can see, it's pretty cool the way it creates these cards that are very similar to a baseball card experience. So it's pretty neat the way that works. Let me show you how this actually works. And we'll go through this from beginning to end a little bit. So I've just connected to open receivables data using the Power GP Online API. And so what I'm going to do, and the data is not super updated, I just want to point that out. I'm going to click on the ellipsis, and I'm going to go get from the marketplace this new visual. So if you've never gone out and looked for a new visual, this is how you do it. And I'm going to look up HTML. And come on. Oh, you got to spell it right. I don't know if you guys knew that. All right, so here's the HTML viewer. I'm going to go ahead and add this viewer or visual in. So I've got a visual. Now what you're going to do is you're going to actually add in a column to your data. And so this is one of the things that I've been thinking about, is because as I come in and look at my data, I'm actually going to end up having a whole nother column here. As you can see, everything seems to be, for the most part, over 120 days old. So that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking, how much do I want to do this? Because I'm going to be increasing the size of my data by doing this. And so let me come in and just add in a new column, and I'll show you how this works. And this is something I think a lot of people may or may not know. I'm going to go ahead and drop this down, but let me give this a name. We'll just call it HTML. And if you want to go down to the second line, if you hold the shift key down and then press enter, it'll go down to the next line. The same works when you're doing formulas in Power Apps as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start keying in my HTML. And what's different is you're actually using your DAX to create this HTML. So you don't flat out write the HTML. You have to put all of the HTML tagging in double quotes. So I'm just going to do something really small here. I'm going to grab, do a little div, and then you have to concatenate. So I'm putting everything in to these quotes. So I'm just putting in my first tag, and then I'm going to tell it what I want to see. So I want to see customer, and then now, just like normally in DAX, I'm getting my fields. And so there's the first one, and I'm going to just concatenate next to that, maybe a space, dash space, and then concatenate again. And then I'm going to grab the customer name, and I'm just typing in the customer name field, and then concatenate once again. That part, whoops, lines 3 and 4 and 5 are going to be very similar, or just pure DAX code, nothing particularly special about it. Let me cheat here, should have did that earlier. And then let me also grab the unapplied amount. Okay, so now that I have all that done, now I'm going to put in my ending tag. That does not concatenate. I'll put in my ending tag, which is also done in double quotes. And now that I have that done, I can simply click on the accept or the check and close that up. Now I'm going to put in my visual out here. Just make that bigger. And I'm going to drag that new column out there. And that's how easy you could do some things. So one of the things I've been thinking about in terms of financial software, well, I don't know, that's a weird number there, is thinking about like a trial balance. How can I do a trial balance and do some things? So that's one thing I've been thinking about. Now, because it's HTML code, you could actually go so far as to add in additional information. So what I'm going to do now is add in, first of all, a variable. So a lot of people don't know in DAX you could add variables. And you could only add local variables, not global variables. So I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to paste in, I'm not going to type all that in. So I'm going to create something called a variable called div format, which has just some lines and increases the font size, nothing super fancy. And so now inside of the tag, I want to put in the style. So I'll just put in style equals. Now normally at this point, you're going to put in double quotes what your style is. So to do that, if I put in double quotes, it's going to think it's part of the formula. So what we do is we put in a single quote, and then we put in a double quote to end that first bit of HTML code. And then now I'm going to look for my div format. Whoops. I got to concatenate it first. And I'll just do it this way. It might be easier to see. My div my div format, which is making sure I am writing this right. Why do I not have that right? Nothing goes right when you expect it.
Would that be because it's div style actually?
Yeah, let's see. Maybe
the previous squiggly underline.
Yes. Thank you. You know what? I'm just going to cheat and do this whole line like this. There we go. Now I should have it right. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So what I did is, in this particular case now, you can see it's also, I put that single quote there on this tag as well. And so I just added in the variable here. And I'm going to go ahead and just choose to accept that. And that didn't work, so we're going to cheat and copy the whole, oh, I know why, because I forgot the word return. Hello. Let me cancel that out. Nothing goes right when you want it to. All right, so I got to type in the word return. If you put in a variable, you have to type in the word return. That's why it wasn't showing up. All right, so now that I've got that corrected, let me close this up. And I told it to fix that and throw that back out there, but let's just drag this back out there. And now you can see I have a very different view because I just used HTML formatting to achieve this. So if you are not a developer per se, but you know some HTML, or you have Google or Bing, you could probably create your own. You just have to remember that everything gets concatenated in there. So I think that's pretty darn cool. And if I go back to TED's, let me open up TED's and show you how amazing he did his code. Let's see, which one is it? Product category. There, you can see he has a lot of variables, so he's putting in quite a few codes. And then let me pull mine back in because I want to show you that you could also put some filters on it. And this, so you can see where probably my brain is thinking about things. So is a customer on hold? Here are the invoices for the customers on hold. So even though I developed, I used this custom visual and developed HTML coding to display the information. You also have to do HTML formatting here, similar to what we do in Power Apps. It's still interactive with everything else in the system, so you could do your own custom visuals that way. So that's one of the things that I've been thinking about, and that's pretty cool. Have you guys seen that before?
No.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty cool way to kind of create custom visuals if you're not like a big developer. I don't know. I just that's something that I have found to be pretty cool. All right, so
yeah, I can't say I'm a big Power BI developer, so it's certainly something that really caught my attention. And it seems the entire platform is just evolving to really incorporate some extraordinarily nice functionality. I mean, I didn't know you could do half of the things you showed me in this particular case. So.
Oh yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. So I'm super excited about that, and I've got my fingers crossed. And no, this is not anything anyone has ever said, that at some point and someday they'll give us global variables, at least for the whole report, not just on that. But I think because then it would make it a little bit easier. But you could do some really cool things. So I've been thinking about trial balances. How can I use that particular tool to create the trial balance experience? And so that's something I've been thinking about. But you could do a lot of really cool things with it, just what you've seen. So, all right, cool. So that's something I've been playing with. I haven't shared in a while, so I thought I would share today. And so why don't we go with, so we started with a business use case. Steve, why don't we go practical next, and then we'll end with fun with Mariano.
Absolutely.
Okay, Steve, you're up.
Okay, let me figure out how to share my screen. Pick window, and where am I?
When you're looking at the pick window, you kind of remind me of like one of those bad family portraits where they have you looking up at the stars or something.
Yes, I have too many monitors here, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, sure can.
Okay, so the background of this is that when I have to generate passwords for a new website, I'm sure you guys have had this as well. It's really annoying to have to come up with a good password, and there are password generators, but I didn't like the ones that just generated scrambled text. They were unreadable. If I had to type them on my mobile device for some reason, it was a nightmare. So several years ago, I created this app in .NET, and I compiled over 100,000 words, and it randomly selects words from that list. I can specify how many words I want, the length, whether I want numbered and symbols, and then down here I say, well, this is 26 characters. And as we know, Azure Active Directory has like a 15 or 16 character limit. So I have to adjust. I need parameters to adjust how long this is going to be. So I have to kind of tone things down for Azure. And maybe I need to remove a few to make the limit. So I've been using this for years. And I thought, well, hey, can I do this in a Power App? And immediately I thought, well, I can do a UI in the Power App. But how do I deal with 100,000 words, do pseudo-random number generators to select the words, combine it with symbols and all those things? So what I did is I created a Power App that is the front end. But on the back end, I developed an Azure function. So the UI, as we know, the UI in Power Apps is super simple, super quick. You could do this in 5 or 10 minutes. But on the back end, because there may be a way to do some of this in Power Apps through their Power Apps functions, but this is C#, and this is what an Azure function looks like. You basically just create a new Azure function and Visual Studio. And I say, well,
we don't see your Visual Studio. Are you showing that?
Oh, you don't? Okay,
no.
Let me just pick another window. Okay. It's doing...
It showed you a screen.
Specific application. Okay, let me show my whole window. One second. Let me stop sharing and share entire screen. Sorry, I was choosing the wrong one.
That's okay. It just reminded me that I don't have a Power Addict shirt since I see Mariano's.
Okay, sorry about that.
There you go, Belinda. I'm actually smoothing it out for you.
Okay, so do you see some code now?
We do.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so this is what a Azure function looks like. And so I created an Azure function called generate passphrase, and I won't get into the details, but this is relatively simple C# code. And I said, well, I want to be able to pass in certain parameters from my Power App because I want to be able to specify how many words, how long the words are, numbers, symbols, spaces, things like that. So I'm accepting these as parameters, just doing a little bit of code here that generates that random password. And I'm actually using a cryptography library to generate the random numbers for me. And it pulls it all together, and it says, okay, great, I'm going to return this passphrase that I built. And so in order to access that via Power Apps, I was trying to call that Azure function directly, but I ran into a lot of problems. I just couldn't get it to work. In theory, you're supposed to be able to do it, but I haven't figured out how to do it yet. There's something about the authentication between Power Apps and Azure functions that doesn't seem to quite work right. So I received a recommendation from, I believe it was Melissa on the Power Apps forum. She said, well, just go with a flow instead. So that's what I did. So I created a flow here.
Which Melissa?
Melissa Hubbard.
Ah, I like her.
Yes,
well, I like Belinda.
Superflow MVP. And this is a simple flow. It says, okay, great. When Power Apps calls me, I'm going to receive these values for all those parameters, and I'm just going to call my Azure function. And here, this is just the URL. We pass in these parameters, and once it is done, it's going to get back some JSON. It's going to say, okay, how long did this take? What is the passphrase? What's the total length? And just sends these back to the Power Apps. So it makes a call out to Azure Functions, returns it all back. Now, this was working, as I mentioned earlier, but as of this morning, for some reason, the flow just starts to go haywire, as you can see when Power Apps calls it. It tests out fine, works fine for me outside of Power Apps, but within Power Apps, it does not work. But the concept is you can adjust how many words you want, what the total length is of each word, whether you want numbers or symbols, how many digits you want in each number, and then you click on generate and it will display the passphrase there, or it should. And one thing I added was that the Azure function, I'm returning the total runtime in milliseconds, so that displays there. And on the bottom number, I'm displaying how long it took from when I clicked that button to when Power Apps is done calling flow and returning everything to show me my Azure Function elapsed time and my Power Apps elapsed time, because as one of the things you'll notice is when you start calling out to web services, you'll start to get latency. So I wanted to be able to know how long those things were taking.
That's pretty cool. As I shared with you before we got started, I constantly complain about two things: hackers and meth heads, because I end up in password hell about every 3 weeks, especially with the Microsoft Live password.
Yeah.
I've started using the authenticator on my phone, and that's actually helped a lot. But
Same here.
yeah, it's and then I hate not being able to buy Sudafed without my passport. So I constantly complain about hackers and meth heads. That's pretty cool.
Can I ask you a quick question, Steve?
Sure.
What choice for storing the 100,000 words did you use? A SharePoint list or?
Excellent question. That is actually in an Azure SQL DB. So I wanted to make this all serverless, all cloud-based. So if I go into my my server here, so I took my 100,000 words and I uploaded it to an Azure SQL database. And if SQL Server Management Studio will load, it looks just like any other SQL server. You connect to it via SSMS, you query it, and it is a table. So
that's pretty cool.
I noticed that you had the option for misspelling. So is part of the password capabilities that you could take one of your words and misspell
Correct. Yes, and so the cryptographers and pen testers that I've spoken with say, well, we can detect if you're using a dictionary word in your passphrase. And I'm thinking, if I have a 28-character passphrase, how are you possibly doing that? They claim they have password crackers that can hint towards using dictionary words, even though it looks like this. So I said, fine. Let me add an option to misspell the word. And it intentionally changes one character in each word with a random letter. So even if they want to do a dictionary attack, it's not going to match. And
I started doing that a couple years ago, only because I'm a bad speller. And I have like 3 separate Office 365 accounts. And so I just made it a habit. When I had to change one, I changed them all so they would always use the same thing. And one time I misspelled a word, and then I thought, you know what, that's probably not a bad idea. And so, yeah, that's interesting that they said that.
And that is exactly the case. And so, the word is still semi-recognizable, but when you misspell one character, it's like, okay, it kind of theoretically eliminates the dictionary attack. But, I mean, these passphrases, they're not like super cryptographically secure. It's not 97 characters long usually, because a lot of websites have limitations. But it's far better than me trying to make up something, blue birthday turtle 7, So this makes it much easier. It generates it randomly. It all goes into my password manager. I still use a password manager. Every single website uses a different password, which is why I generated this tool. So
that's awesome.
That is pretty awesome. Now, do you use any password keepers?
Yes, I use a password manager called RoboForm, but any password manager, 1Password, KeyPass, you name it, as long as you're using something that you like, that's great.
So I wonder at some point we might be able to even get Flow to update our individual password keepers with the new password generated.
It's all about the connectors.
Yes.
My password manager detects when I use a new password, so it automatically prompts me and says, do you want to save this? And so it takes care of that for me. But if yours doesn't, you could potentially do that, although, boy, that might be tricky.
Yeah. I want the world. Actually, what I want is for hackers to stop so that we don't have to come up with these crazy passwords. So that is pretty awesome. That was very clever. And you said you've used one in C# for a while?
Yes, I've been using the one that I developed in .NET for several years now. So I just got tired of having to come up with passwords. So that's why I built it for myself. And so I figured this would be a great little demo for Power Apps. And what was nice was I was able to use Azure SQL Database, Azure Functions, Flow, and Power Apps. So 4 different technologies sewn together in order to accomplish the task.
That's very cool.
That is cool. That is cool. I like that. And that's a really practical tool for...
And what is also nice is I can use it on my mobile device. So my .NET app is for my Windows machines only, but Power Apps can run on my Windows machine, my iPhone, my iPad, anywhere.
Yeah, and that would enable you to, if you're helping your mother or grandmother create a password.
Right.
Although I would hesitate.
Or my wife, my kids.
Yeah, I would hesitate giving that to, I'm not meaning to pick on my mother, but my mother, I would hesitate. She'd be, what does that mean? Nothing. So, cool. Very cool. All right, Mr. Gomez. So now we've seen
Yes,
we've seen business use, we've seen practical use. Let's have some fun.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see where I can find you guys. I think you're here, so share this.
And Vivek, I still don't have that shirt. Right. Sorry.
And so let me give you a little bit of background on
Mariano,
what I started to.
you're sharing the live streaming and not.
Oh, am I?
Yeah, you're sharing what's on YouTube and not what's
Yeah, that probably is a problem.
So everybody is hearing you and I talk and watching Steve's mouth.
That's awesome. So let me go back here and do a share screen, entire screen, and pick one will be it. So let's go with that.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the things that I, as a bit of a background, I think most of you guys are familiar with the Galaga game. Also, some people call it Space Invaders, whatever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I was highly interested in this game and figure out, can I reproduce some of it, half of it, or none of it in Power Apps? So if you can play some of the game itself and some of the, pre-recorded videos that you can find on YouTube, you'll see that, this game has some complexities to it. It's not just an easy game that you can basically say, I'm gonna build from one day to the other. First and foremost, the sprites, right? That's one of the things that you need to focus on, how you recreate some of these movements. You also have the Galaga screen or ship itself. That's something to be considered. But also part of what drew my attention mostly is take a look at the motion that some of the sprites follow. That's fairly complicated motion. It seems to follow some mathematical patterns, and as you know, Belinda and Steve, mathematics is dear to my heart. So that's why I sort of decided that, let's see how much we can get done and try to figure out some of the rest in the process and get it to a stage where I can actually launch this to the community and have folks go at it by adding more complexity and more functionality to it. So let's see what I started with. The first thing I did was to create the game surface. So the game surface is fairly, fairly simple. I started basic. I didn't want to introduce any major complexities into the process. I just wanted to get something that would be adequately functional to at least understand the patterns that I needed to build. So let's focus on the sprites initially. As you already know, Power Apps introduced components as an experimental feature. So I figured one of the things I wanted to do is see how I could leverage components. And I'll further explain some of the conversations I had with our dear friend Brian Dang on how I can improve, the experience from a component standpoint. But, as I said, let's start basic. So let's take a look at some of the sprites. For example, the bumblebee. Bumblebee has two different stages. It has, the wing flapping thing, and obviously it moves across the screen. So I needed to figure out a way to account for those two motions, right? When the wing was expanded and when it was contracted. So for that, I imported an image. Components do allow you to insert or insert images in your or media assets in your as part of the component. So that was something that I did introduce as part of the properties of this component. So where did I get the images? So I've kind of started to research. Well, let's figure out who has sprites out there. And I came across this company called 8-Brick Arcade. And then they seem to currently produce toys that you can find, probably at some of the toy stores, popular toy stores out there. But in addition to that, when I started scrolling down this page, I noticed that they had this particular 8-bit like looking sprite. And lo and behold, when I right click on it and hit save image, the first thing it proposed was to save an SVG. So that's absolutely great, because now all I had to do was really bring that particular SVG into my component. And the way I did that was by adding two image objects and sort of, work with that component to basically create the encoded SVG. Now, SVG is not something that I would claim any major knowledge of. So there are some pretty good resources out there to learn SVG, but let's put it this way: it's just a graphical HTML code-based pattern for achieving some sort of imagery in standard HTML.
So can I ask you a question? So all that code,
Absolutely.
all that code we see that you had listed there, that's actually creating the image there. That code
It's
itself.
actually creating the image. Yeah.
So you don't have to store it anywhere. You just let it recreate.
What I had to that is correct, and that's what I initially thought I had uploaded the images when I did the initial, my first experimental version of it. But then I realized if I could get the SVGs, then I wouldn't actually have to import any assets into my component itself. So thanks for the clarification. Or thanks for pointing that out. That was actually important to know.
That's very cool. I've never seen that before.
Me either.
Yeah, my initial experimental component did import the images as assets. The problem that I had though was I didn't want to have to rely on any external asset. I want it to be very self-contained. Okay. So for that, I'm using, SVG instead. So I was lucky enough to come across this site, as I said, that had the different SVGs for each one of the characters. All right. So once I had the components built, and there's a component for just about every single one of the characters, I figured, well, going back to the design surface, I wanted to add very simple controls that I could programmatically allow these characters to move around. So as you can see here, I have a double click, a button that actually allows me to move to the left, a button that allows me to move to the right, and a fire button. Okay. Now, these buttons themselves are actually buttons that are transparent, that are overlaid on top of the icons, and I'll explain some of that, why the reason of that, or the reason behind that. Then, as you can tell, what I did was I also added the sprites. These are basically added from the component menu. So if you go over here to insert, you have all the sprites that I created are available as components now to this particular solution. And the other thing I did was, if I did add these to move around, then I needed to somehow restart the game or reset the game. So I added this new game button and a slider that would then allow me to, because I didn't want to affix the motion of the Galaga itself, the Galaga character itself, what I wanted to do was I wanted to allow users to control how fast or how slow they wanted to move this particular character. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the buttons. So as I mentioned before, I added the motion controls for Galaga. And this particular button, all it does is, what I wanted to do was capture the press event, to provide a way of moving the character uninterrupted as opposed to clicking one or performing one press at a time on the button. So that's the reason why I didn't use the icons directly, because the icons do not have a press event. So if you look at a button does have a press event. Okay, maybe I'm actually highlighting let me just get the button directly. Here we go. So this one would have a press property. I think it's not exposed. It's just one of those properties that is not exposed, but it does have a press event. And what I wanted to do is capture that event. The difference with icons is icons do not have a press property, and that's unfortunate. I wish they did. That way I didn't have to use or consume two extra controls just to achieve that.
Got it.
But then one of the things that I wanted to do then was, use the transparency option on the button itself to then pop the icons out, and that's kind of how I did that. So the buttons themselves are only to capture the press event. Now, obviously, if I wanted to capture that, then I needed to do something with it. And that's where I introduced this timer control, right? So this timer control basically, if you look at the events that are associated to it, on timer start, I would check if the left button is pressed, and therefore I would update the X position, the X coordinate based on the current position minus the slider value, right? Or if the right one is pressed, then I would increment that value from where it is defined by the slider. So if I run this quickly, right, and I press this constantly, you will see now that, that creates that motion. If I actually increase my slider, then obviously the motion becomes more accelerated. It moves much faster across the Now, if I allow users to.
Mariano, your audio is cutting out.
Yeah, I think we have some connection.
Yeah, Mariano, why
No
don't...
connection.
I don't think he could hear. This happened before.
Yeah.
So, let me see if I could Skype him, or, you know what? Let me try to... All right, so now everyone knows we can hear him. So let me just press that group chat back again. Let's see. Open it back up and say, turn off your camera. See if that works. And he's still going along, isn't he?
Yep.
Yep. All right. So Steve and I will try to narrate. Meanwhile.
And so some of the background in this is, if you follow the Power Apps users on Twitter, there is a group that seems to be popular in Japan, or Japanese MVPs seem to be very focused on this, where they are producing some amazing graphics and animations using Power Apps. And you wouldn't think of Power Apps as a platform for gaming or animation or things like that, but really just mind-blowing. So Mariano is following that lead, and he's combining both the video game aspect, the graphic aspect, and also a mathematical aspect, because he's actually using mathematical equations to produce the curves that dictate the movement of these sprites or characters on the screen that you see. So I don't know how far along he is, but he was developing a mathematical equation to have it curve gradually as the insect flips over and heads down towards a spaceship to attack it.
That is astounding to me. And yeah, and he was able probably to take advantage of one of the things that he had done. He'd done some images that kind of created a rose pattern, and so
yes,
so that
exactly.
was, yeah, he probably is using a lot of the same mathematics for that as he is. And I was trying to find, hopefully while we try to get his attention, here we go. I was trying to get, are we showing us the game? I was trying to get one of the people he follows, the Twitter.
No, have you seen Hero Power Addict? Yes, that's what I'm pulling up as well.
Well, I don't know that this one is, actually, I'm going to pull this up, and I want to remind everyone, you know, that when you look at some of these, depending on what you're using, you can have it translate for you. But here's an example. Well, that's a GIF. But yeah,
I'm still seeing Mariano's screen on the
Oh,
share.
okay. Oh, because I didn't share probably. But yeah, so check out who Mariano's following, and you should be able to like yeah.
So I can show my screen if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since we can't get through to Mariano.
Yep.
Let me feel bad, but
you should be able to just share a screen right on top of him and take over.
Okay, so where is it? Let me try this one.
There you go. I see you.
Okay, so
but Steve, I'm seeing your
Twitter?
I'm seeing the live event again.
Oh, the live event. Okay.
Yep.
Man, this is complicated, Belinda. I need a degree.
I need to find a different screen share program for us. Okay. And then maybe we can keep.
I think it's this one. Okay, here we go. Is that it?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, so Hero Power Addict, and his Twitter handle is mofu_dance. And so he has some great examples. This is actually by someone else, Phil Topness, who has some great demos. And so Phil did the Magic 8-Ball in Power Apps, and he used the accelerometer of the phone in order to detect whether he was turning the phone over. And so that's one great example. And so if you start to follow the Japanese Power App MVPs, it's really crazy. And this is an example of one of the graphics that he did. A lot of it's in Japanese, but you have to use Google Translate.
It has translate tweet right there for each tweet.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you could just amaze your friends by amaze your friends by making him think that you was able to read it. Yeah. So this is very similar to one that Mariano did.
Yeah. So he's trying to, or we were discussing how to use Power Apps to trace the elliptic motion of the planets, and so he's working on that. And the math is beyond my capabilities, but yeah, just tons and tons of content. So here, this is a Power App where he's able to produce various shapes to draw.
It's like a spirograph, yeah.
Exactly. And it was a while ago, but let's see if he's got an animation.
So I'm trying to think about what besides gaming, what the use case would be for some of those.
I have that challenge as well, but I think what it could potentially do is offer some very refined UI. Out of the box, some of the Power App screens look very generic, like the one that I showed you of mine, but they're demonstrating that you can have some very, very refined UI. So in the case of, there are presumably some business cases where you want that graphics, and normally that would require, say, JavaScript in a web browser and some really UI-specific development. But with Power Apps, you can potentially do that with graphics and components now.
So Mariano just saw the chat, as you can see. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So we'll see if Mariano can get back on to finish this demonstration. Then meanwhile, it doesn't look like we have any
I'm
questions.
no longer sharing, right?
You are no longer sharing yet.
Okay, good.
So you can pull your private stuff back up if you want to. It's okay. So, oh, but I see your face.
Yep, I turned the camera back on, so.
Yep. Yep, so let's see. Mariano, he left the call. He's joining back in. And let's give him a second to get back in. Yeah, so I've been struggling on some of the use case for some of those kinds of tools as well. Like how do we turn them into kind of a serious business use case? But there are so many amazing examples of things that initially appear to be minor that provide incredible value for people. So can we hear you now?
Okay.
Yay!
I don't know what happened there. It happened like this last time. So what's the last thing you heard?
Hi, I'm Mariano.
No, you were starting on the video game explaining the sprites, but then we lost you. So.
Yep.
That far back?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think I'm not going to go back through the whole thing. So,
well, Steve was picking up on a little bit and talking about it a little bit, and that's where we went to Heroes. Tweets.
I'm just gonna go back and just show you quickly what the game was all about, and kind of end it there. So, as I said, if you hit new game here, the only thing I was trying to explain is
we can't see your screen.
The motion patterns. You can't see my screen now?
Can you share your screen again?
Okay, I can do that. Wow, this was quite a bit of.
I know. Next time we'll try a different screen sharing tool.
Yeah, we gotta ask these guys what they use for their stuff. Anyways, let's just go back over here.
There we go.
So all I was trying to explain was that the sprites basically follow a basic motion pattern that is incremented according to some XY coordinates. Nothing really fancy. The other thing is the way I control the motion of both the character down and the character to the whether it's right or left, is by using these control buttons that are tied to this timer. So anything that is motion related most of the time is timer related, and that's kind of how we go about it.
So
very cool.
So are you using the motion to control those sprites individually? So wow.
Yeah, so basically, if you look at, and this is where I thought I was, I think we gotta work on providing feedback on each other. That way we can figure out who's live and who's not. But the bottom line here is, if you look at this particular timer, which controls the sprites, all it does is it basically, on the timer start, it updates the x-axis movement. And at the end of that timer, it basically determines, the position of the sprite and update accordingly. So when sprites basically get to the end, that's when the Y coordinate is updated. Then it starts to move back to the left and drops one row and keep moving back to the right.
And it's moving all the sprites at one time.
Correct. So the motion is moving all the sprites at one time. What I'm going to do for a second round is I'm going to improve the component itself, or the components itself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring all these sprites into a gallery so I can control, the motion much better and determine which sprites go in what sequence and so on. Okay?
Okay.
Yep.
So right now the insects are not separate elements that can move freely.
That is good.
Okay.
It's not entirely accurate, because in reality, what I have is each one of these is spaced out from the,
Mm-hmm.
based on the original initial column. They're
Yep.
spaced out by a factor, right?
Okay.
So this is 2 times the spacing, 3 times the spacing, 4 times the spacing, and so on. But in my second iteration, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to combine both spacing, how much they fall, and which characters appear via a gallery in a component. Okay, so I'm going to reorganize the way I have the components defined. So instead of making each sprite its own component, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one component that has, that allows me to parameterize the sprites and the motion and the spacing and all these things that are, very difficult to control by defining just one component at a time. Does that make sense?
If you group them as there'll be a gallery of components.
No, there is no. I don't think PowerUp supports a gallery of components at this point. But what it does do is it will allow me to have a gallery of images.
Okay, got it.
So then I can more granularly control how in what sequence those images might appear, or the lineup and etc. So there is a lot to it. I was explaining something where I noticed you were showing Heroes,
yes. Twitter
application. Correct. So one of the things that I was working on is the motion itself.
This is it. Yeah.
I was doing some research, and I noticed that a lot of the motions that are used or implemented in Galaga follow Bezier curve patterns, basically cubic Bezier curve patterns. And basically, in summary, the theory goes something like this: if I have any given 4 points, you can actually create a curve that approximates through those 4 points based on an equation, right? Based on a cubic equation. So if I clear this out and start this, you'll see that this curve approximates to these 4 points. Now, you can control the granularity of you can see a little jittered here, but
right.
You can control the granularity, again, what I did was via a timer, I control how I wanted those sticks to increment. So let me just fine tune this a bit. But what I had in mind was, if you can see it smoother now. What I'll do is I'll basically create a 4 or 5 predefined motion patterns that I can randomize and apply to the different, to group or a stuff. No. And replicas this out. What happened?
We lost some of your sound.
Your audio's breaking up again, but I think you're back.
Yeah, you sound back.
Yeah, so if I just grab this one and move it over here, right, and I try to then go back and run this, if I clear it out and start again, you'll see that, the curve then adjusts itself based on the new position of that point.
Very cool.
Okay? Yeah, so there's some mathematics involved. I don't claim to that I'm going to be able to replicate the exact motions, but I know what I'm looking for, and that's the next step in my implementation of this game. I really want to get it to a point where I can put it on the PowerUps community and have everybody go at it, and make it what it needs to be.
Okay, maybe you could help me with something too. So I'm glad you're back on the screen, because with the addition of components, and sorry that I'm the one that keeps bringing it down to like, what's the business application? But can you give me an example of a business application for using these components like this?
Yeah, maybe you will see it in a different sense when I bring up this other example that I created at one time with components. So one of the things that that I found you can do, or the practical business case for it is, if you're an ISV, you could probably build components or that provide certain type of functionality that that can be consumed by other applications, right? So the idea of components is to provide promote reusability, but also from an ISV perspective, you could actually deploy components that other users or other entities can consume within their applications. And I don't know how much if you guys were on the PFC, the Power Apps Control Framework, PCF meeting yesterday.
Yeah, that's NDA though.
Yeah, that's something that's coming down the road. They've been promoting some of it, at least from a conceptual point, throughout. So, that's something coming down the road that will facilitate how ISVs, deploy certain control functionality. But anyways, in the scheme of things, this component that I built is just a numeric up and down control, but it persists the down press for the buttons. Because one of the things that I hated most of the initial implementations that I saw is you had to click one at a time, one click at a time to make it happen. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what I can do now is I can increase the sensitivity, and then as you can see here, if I press constantly, it will do what it needs to do. If I press down, then it does the same thing. I can initialize this, by the way, and that's probably why my press wasn't working. Yeah, there you go. So as you can see, now my press starts to work based on my timer. Again, it uses a timer for that inside the component in order to decrease or increase the value itself. So it's actually better than having to click one at a time to move your press.
That is a component where
Correct.
you have embedded a timer behind the scenes that detects whether you're holding down that arrow button.
Correct. So this component does allow me to create a minimum value to start it off, a maximum value that I want it to go to, a sensitivity, and it delivers this value obviously as an output property. And inside, all it does is it implements a timer, and obviously the same features that you saw with the in the Galaga game for the button press. That's what I'm also implementing here.
Wow.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. And so, Belinda,
okay,
I think this goes to the point that I was saying that I think the components plus it's a game, but really the effort to build those games is really enhancing the user experience and the user interface of Power Apps. So it's no longer a very simple drag and drop, button field, really basic UI. You can have some really rich UI here that might eventually rival, really refined web apps.
Correct. The other thing that components that do promote is reusability, right? So obviously I can have this in an app, but if I wanted to pull in this particular case, if I wanted to pull in another numeric up and down control, I could just grab this whole thing, copy paste it, and now I have a second one, right?
Yeah.
So, it just eases the pain of having to deal with stuff again that you don't want to have to necessarily do through the traditional methods of duplicating all these controls that I use inside of this component once again in your application. So that's kind of what you are gaining from it.
Wow.
Okay. And by the way, the performance is absolutely mind-blowing when you use components versus traditional 10, 15 controls. Remember one thing about Power Apps, the more controls you introduce in your application, the less performant it becomes. So as a method of saving controls, components is probably the best thing that they could have come up with. Now it's still an experimental feature, but basically it works beautifully in the current state.
Very cool.
Okay, so unfortunately, I was not able to show, talk through the minutia of the Galaga application, and perhaps I think I'm gonna do one of these sessions with Brian Dang pretty soon. So if you didn't catch all the details here, hopefully you can catch them in my session with Brian.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would love watching that. I adore him anyhow. And for those of you who follow a lot of Mariano's pictures on whatever social media you have, if you always look over his shoulder, there's a good chance you'll spot my gray hair peeking out over the shoulder because I love to photobomb him. So so take a look at that.
Yep.
So
sure do.
Yeah, I love it. I can't help it. So that's pretty fascinating, and yeah, you did get me thinking about the reusability of the components being something that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Gaming is one of those things that pushes the limits of things, right? You definitely have the ability with gaming to understand some of the advanced concepts in power-ups. I don't necessarily claim to know all the ins and outs, but start small. That's something that I've learned from Brian. If you have a basic idea, develop that idea. Then you start building on top of those ideas, and you start constructing a solution. What seemed to me impossible at one time is just so much easier to do with power-ups. If you had to develop a game like Galaxian in C# or any of these other traditional language constructs, it would certainly take you a humongous amount of time, and you probably wouldn't get half of the results that you did with this. So all things considered, I just find it fascinating that you can do some of these things so easily with power-ups and the current functionality.
Very cool.
Agreed.
And it goes back to I'm grateful that I don't have to be smart because I have very smart friends. So, and you too. So that's pretty nifty. All right. So I guess that is wrapping us up for today. Next time we're going to try a whole different screen sharing application so we can make sure we hang on to Mr. Gomez through the whole event. So, any closing thoughts as we wrap this up? We'll start with you, Steve.
No, just I'd say experiment. I think this is only my second Power App that I've created, and it's easy. Like Mariano said, just start with something simple, and after a few minutes, you'll see how easy it is. With a few Google searches or Bing searches, you'll find the formulas you need, figure out how to get buttons to do what you want, and you'll very quickly come up to speed.
Cool. Yeah. Mariano, closing thoughts?
I have to give shout out and as part of my thoughts to the amazing Power Ups community, guys like Vivek, like Brian, certainly Christian, Shane Young. I mean, the names could go on and on. Gals like Louise in Germany, Gita. I mean, as I said, I could sit here and probably recite names for hours on end, but these are people that are worth following. They provide amazing value to the community, and certainly have, coming from a Dynamics on-premise background, for me to be able to pick this up, it wouldn't be possible without really understanding how the pros are doing it. And I keep following those guys, and gals. It's plenty of smart people in the community.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Go out there, and follow them. It sounds like I'm a big fan of all of them, by the way. So
me too.
I proudly wear my Power Addicts t-shirt now. So there you go, Vivek.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So he's got a lot of shout outs today. And
Yep,
if it,
yep.
for those of you who are interested in taking some courses, as I mentioned, Ted Pattison from Critical Path Training, he is fabulous. And so I strongly encourage you to check out his website and to look up a few things. Next week, if any of you who are new to Flow, I'm doing a webinar. I probably ought to try to pull it up on the screen, but I'm doing a webinar on the new Microsoft Forms and Flow. So if you guys are interested in that, you can basically, if you go out to our Ingevity site and go to events, I'll just point it out, Ingevity, NJEVITY.com, and go to events. You'll be able to register for that. It's just a little free one. It's nowhere near the complexity of anything that we've done today, but we've covered a lot of different languages today. I started with the very simple HTML. Steve brought up some C#, some JSON, and Mariano was like deep into math. Like it's so.
Yeah, and SVG. I know you didn't probably hear that part.
No, we did.
Okay.
We did hear.
That was very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was interesting. That was pretty cool. And I should point out, so I know Steve has young children. Mariano has one son who's quasi-young. He's a young man. I have a granddaughter who's 8, and next week is her spring break. And we are going to try to get through a book on, I'm going to try to use Scratch and building some animation. So by the time I get through with that, yeah, I might be interested in doing the minor league version of what Mariano does. So
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, other than that, thank you everyone for watching, and hopefully next time everything was a lot smoother this time, with the exception of losing you for just a little bit. But next time we'll try to tackle that. And I think if any of you are interested, all 3 of us will be in Orlando in October. I know that's 6 months out, but we'll all be there. So you can kind of hang out with us. And by then, I'm sure we will have done a couple more of these, but I wanted to do a little bit of a promo for that. So for the Power Platform Summit. So I am super excited about that. Cool. All right.
I'm excited about the user group world tour in South Africa. So that's good.
Well, I'll be doing the Business Application Summit while you're there, and I do also want to point out on May 15th we're having our first Power BI user group here in Charleston, and we had a switch on the speakers. Stephen Siciliano will be our speaker, and so we thought we were going to have John Levesque, and he said, like, I have bad news, and I didn't want to tell him this, and I have a feeling based on Daniel Christian's reaction, because he also was doing the same in Charlotte. It reminded me of a time that last minute my husband and I when we were living in New York, decided to take a cruise. And, get cheap pricing, and there was a cruise to Canada, and it was a part we hadn't been to before, and we're like, oh, this will be fun. And we signed up for the cruise, and we were so close, we literally walked with our luggage to the cruise ship. And while we're in line, they said, hey, there's a storm, so we're not going to Canada, we're going to Bermuda. And we looked at each other, score! And so so when John sent me that email and he said Stephen was coming, I was like, score! And I adore John, but, it's like, I feel like I traded one rock star for another. So instead of seeing, I don't know, the Rolling Stones, I'm seeing Elton John or something like that. It's still pretty darn amazing. So if you happen to be in the Charleston area, come join. And enough self-promotion, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. We had a great time, and I learned a lot. And so hopefully we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.